Cloud, so I'm starting it back up again. Okay, now let me find the. I think actually, because a couple people have talked, I think somehow we got where people can unmute themselves, which is obviously fine, right? We don't care. I just didn't want everybody unmuted at the same time. But does anybody have any questions specifically on classes that we want to touch on? Is there?
People probably have a lot of questions, but yeah, let's hear if there's any. I know for sure with myself, the reason that I so rarely use classes is that a lot of my AutoHotkey projects probably ain't big enough.
Yeah, it's almost like justify it, right?
Yeah, it could easily be justifiable, but just like the one we just saw with the IE object, if you had a class for that and you always knew that, hey, if I need a private instance of IE, then you would already have written all of what you needed. And of course, you could do that with a function and have that stored somewhere. But as he just showed us, all of the extra stuff that you can easily cram in there, that actually makes a lot of fun.
What I like about it is it lets me build toolboxes, which then let me throw together fairly complex scripts in very short periods of time, because everything's abstracted, and I don't have to go digging through to look at the implementation details, because it's all contained in the class.
Yeah, exactly, and that's also what I thought about, that each time I go to whatever answer a question I've answered a couple of times before, or when I need to do something that I've done so many times before, instead of actually going and finding a script where I did it, just having it all put into one complex class might actually save quite a lot of time. So, yeah.
I got a question.
Yeah.
All right. So basically, looking at various different languages over the years, like I've never used classes, so I'm not familiar with them at all. But, from C to Java and all that, I noticed that a lot of them, when they get into classes, they have the underscore, before something. And if somebody sees like dual underscores. And so if somebody could just kind of talk about, I've seen somebody in chat say like it was for like special, I don't know, special methods or something like that. So like what's that denote, and what's that all about?
Meta function. Yeah, the double underscore marks it as a meta function. And if you look in the documentation, it has quite a bit of information about what that is, and there's only a handful of them.
And so when you say meta function, that's inherently built into AutoHotkey type thing.
Yes.
Okay. Like I would never define my own underscore names for any reason.
You won't do your own double underscore, but one of the things you have personal conventions. If I have a method in a class that I consider a helper function that will never be used outside, I won't invoke that method from outside. It's only invoked from inside the class among the other methods in the class. I'll oftentimes put an underscore in front of it just to, signals to me that that's a private function within the class and not not something that an external instantiation would access.
So that's just a naming convention that you've adopted that helps you realize it's only in that.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Yeah, and that's probably the same that's going on with the double underscore. It's just a naming convention to kind of emphasize that it is a meta function, right?
Right, but it's a built-in. You can't change that one.
No. Yeah, exactly. It's
right now. I got the AutoHotkey help file open, and so I'm assuming like I could pull one of these searches up to find like a list of these meta functions. Is that right?
Yes.
Like, what would I be looking for in the help file here?
Just go to index in the help file and type meta functions.
Okay,
I
meta function.
have it up on the screen here. Hopefully
There you go.
sharing. But
Excellent. All right, thank you.
Yeah, I'd say that with the classes, of course, the meta functions are good to have, but if you're just starting with classes, most of the time you probably wouldn't really need to change these. But of course,
the one you'll use all the time is the new, because the new allows you to instantiate the class multiple times. So that's the one that you. The other ones I've used get and set, and that reference I just gave you about throwing non-existent method. It uses the call meta function, but normally just the new is what you would use.
Yeah, makes sense. And within the new, if you actually put something in there, it would most likely be because you wanted something special to happen each time you made a new one, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
Oftentimes I'll pass it an object so that it can then instantiate itself, but that object contains all the parameters that it needs to set it up essentially.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You had something else up there, Joe? You were looking on the forum or what?
no, well, I was finding the error throw an error thing that he had mentioned.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah, because the call will of course be called each time anything is called. So yeah, you'll build it into that. That makes sense.
So that I add that I just the way it says there, class test extends throw non-existent method. If you set up all of your classes like that, if you try to call something that's not, call a method that doesn't exist, it'll bark.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. So just as an example.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was just looking to actually see how he's catching the non-existent method. But okay, so he's doing that with a throw, and that's
he's doing it with the call. The double underscore call is the method that will run if you try to access a method that doesn't exist.
Oh, so that's why the method would. Okay, so the default is a blank method, and that's how it's doing it.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, one thing I haven't tried is just putting a double underscore call method inside of my class instead of extending the other class. I haven't tried that if it'll do the same thing. But usually if I copy something Lexicos does, I just do it.
Yeah.
Obediently.
Mm-hmm. I've found that even copying code that is years old for another version, most of the time it will still work, which is not something that you see that often. Yeah.
I'm lucky if mine works at all.
So for any of you guys that are web scraping, are any of you building classes for web scraping?
Well, what I was going to mention earlier, the class that I use that I'm learning and I'm still learning from Maestrith is his XML class, and it's both for parsing XML, but also storing and regurgitating. Think of it like of any file. You can easily rip through your XML stuff, store it in there, and then pull it back out, and it's amazing. I can't wait to make some videos on it. But for me, I was learning both how to use his class at the same time how to use XPath, and so it was a double learner for me. But so it's at least related, because often when he is helping me write something, from web scraping, he will use that class to go and store the data that we scrape from the web page. And that's also what I was going to bring up, was to Jackie's point, like often when I'm doing web scraping, I'm doing onesie twosie stuff, and I haven't written anything for it, but because I see this need of like, wow, I can easily grab this data and store it into a format that allows me to also quickly query and extract data out of. I really understand how using that class makes it awesome, because it's so easy. I mean, he writes stuff like there's no tomorrow. He's so fast because he's been using that same class, for years now, and he can just in a heartbeat pull up things, and he knows it so well, right? And that's the other one, is like, man, once you get used to it, and of course you might make tweaks here and there, but that's a huge leverage learning. And I forget who mentioned it earlier, if it was Relayer, that you can go back and repurpose things and not have to dig into everything you did there, right? It's now your go-to, and you keep using it over and over and over.
One of the things with what I've decided, or whatever you'd call that, at one point was that I know that Tank and others were once writing an automation tool for IE when the COM library was still a thing and not built in.
Yeah.
And at that time, I would have seen that as kind of the use of a class, but they themselves said that as soon as COM was actually built into AutoHotkey, there was no real reason to still use it, because you had access to all of the pure functions and methods and stuff like that from the IE object. And essentially, the IE object is a large class that lets you access its methods and its getters and its setters, all of those. So it's the same with Excel. There has been a lot of libraries at times where you could call all of these different Excel functions. But when you have the COM object right there, you can just as easily use the actually built-in methods instead of building your own library. Whereas what you're talking to, Joe, is that when he extends the XML native functions and stuff like that by making a class, he's just doing it because he has some stuff that he feels he can do a little easier than actually using the built-in stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
I think of it as, and maybe this isn't it, but because the basics I'll do is like I will wrap a function, and I will make it, customize it to how I want to use it, and I know I can put exactly this here and here, and those are the things I want to pass or whatever. Yeah,
I love that, but still, I also love that when we post COM stuff on the forum, that everybody can actually just copy and paste it without needing a class from me. Yeah. But still, if you're building something that doesn't really have it on its own, of course it makes sense. But if you just want to pass the parameters in a different order, I don't see the actual need of it. And that was what I saw at some point. There was a lot of functions, especially for Excel, where people wanted to do very small stuff in a little different way, and they are welcome to build functions for themselves. But when they share it with everybody else, and people keep saying, "Hey, right, I can't make this work because it keeps saying I'm missing this or that,"
right?
So yeah, you need to have stuff that is actually a little more complex to do, to kind of what was the word, to kind of make the class useful enough. Mm-hmm. Is that worded correctly? I'm not sure.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
To justify.
Yeah, to justify the actual building of the class. So either you need to do it enough, or it needs to be complex enough to actually take the time and build a class to do it.
Yeah.
That's how I've seen it, at least.
But that is I think that you did a good job there saying, why would I use a class, right? And those are two situations. And maybe a third one is just when you want to group things together, right? Which Relayer mentioned.
Yeah, I kind of felt that made a lot of sense
Yeah.
to actually have it just to group stuff together. I saw, or I had it myself, an include I made a lot for Excel to have all of the constances available.
Right.
And I can't remember where I saw it first, but someone had actually put that into a class. So they could just type Excel var or whatever, and then the name of it, or Excel constants, or whatever it might have been, they actually had called the class, and then the name of whatever Excel called it. And it just made a lot of sense because you might remember what they were all called, but having them grouped together like that, that just looked nice to me.
Right. Hey, I saw this. I don't know if the question got answered, but you guys can see that the question was, anyone know how to avoid getting stuck in this underscore set? And then I think maybe they had put this up here on Pastebin. Does this question make sense? It doesn't. I don't know it well enough to understand if it's a good question or what.
I'm just looking at it, and I'm actually not sure what's going on there. You're making a new C, and then you're setting QVE, and to do that, you're setting this var with value, and I'm not sure that's correct. Anyone who can? Someone is very low, or what?
Yeah, what that's going to do is name is going to be QWE and value will be 1, 2, 3. Then inside the set function, you can do whatever you want with those two parameters. But it looks like what he's doing there is he's going to set up a different parameter called var and give it the value. So QWE won't have a value because.
Yeah, because the setter is actually overriding the setting of QVE.
But he's not returning. So here's one of the places where if you return something, something different will happen than if you don't return it. What I do with things like this is you set it up, you run it, and you try to use a message box and output it and see what it does.
So the comment was they understand there's not a value, but the script is getting stuck. Is there some sort of a circular loop going on?
I have found with set that oftentimes I have to put if statements in front of what's going on inside because yes, it will. This .var, since it doesn't exist, it will call _set again.
Okay, so it will keep calling _set.
Correct.
Yeah, so you have a hidden loop there.
Yes. That's why it's getting stuck.
Yeah.
And so so you'd put an if in front of it, is what you were, something like that you said?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, so the line 8 is actually calling the setter again because you're using this var. Is that what we're saying?
Yes. Set will be called anytime a variable is given a value for the first time.
Yeah, okay, so each time you're trying to set this var, you're actually calling setter, and that sets set var, which is calling setter, and then, yeah, it just keeps going. Okay. I hope that answered the question to the guy who asked.
Yeah, it'd be really great to have lexicos on some of this because I think I was thinking about posting a question to the forum about how to avoid having to put if statements in set and get to avoid those perpetual loops. And if you search some of Lexicos' things on the forum, he warns. I think in the help file somewhere it shows one of his examples in the help mentions that you can end up into an infinite loop with set.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Using this shift here would cause an infinite loop. Anyway, yeah, apparently there's some references of it. Yeah, I mean, that was what Jackie and I, our hopes are, is we notice, because when him and I will talk things through, we learn, it's different, right, than posting to the forum. You can interactively ask questions, ask for clarification. It's so much more efficient. And you hear other ideas. It's just, it's fun. So
Yep.
hopefully we get, enough people showing up these things that I don't know. I've never I don't think I've ever exchanged emails with him, but I don't know if it's a matter of time or, maybe he doesn't like to, who knows, right? But it'd be awesome if we could get him to every once in a while pop in and
maybe over time, if we have something that we feel becomes unanswered, we might have the opportunity to actually ask him to maybe come in and shed some light on it. But I think we need to have something very specific, so he's not just sitting there being asked a million questions or whatever.
Yeah, and just where he goes back and just reads the stuff he's already written, right?
Yeah.
You're like, yeah, I've answered that, 24 times.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He seems to not like repeating himself too much.
Who blames him, right?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, it's I was talking about someone the other day, like, have you tried Google? Have you tried searching for, the question you're asking? I was like, come on.
Yeah, I know it's kind of a standing joke or insult or whatever. Let me Google that for you.
Right.
But yeah, often you can really get some quick answers by doing it. Other times I actually like posing the question to someone, even though I know that I might be able to get the answer on Google, just because, hey, I might actually get some social interaction going. But yeah.
Yeah. The other thing I'd say, though, is, like, this is why I think about the webinar was awesome, was it was a good example where he the person asking this didn't know that they're stuck in an infinite loop, right? So it is hard to, when you don't know what's actually going on, to troubleshoot and to, bring it up. But that's what's happening. So people who know what they're doing can look at it and
yeah. When I just look at this, and I haven't run it and I can't say, but wouldn't this kind of be doable in last lines? I'm just saying that normally if you have, let's say, a wait for a load on IE, you would keep seeing the loop go over and over and over and continue until it was done.
Yep.
Would you see this?
A lot of these, whenever I have an infinite loop with set or something, oftentimes it'll crash. It'll just, it'll just conk out. Because I guess the stack pointer just keeps incrementing because it never returns, and it just uses up all its allotted resources, and AutoHotkey crashes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Jackie and I were before this call, we were talking about our next webinar and what we were going to cover. Maybe a good one for the next one, if we're not quite ready, what we were talking about, Jackie, is just the whole process of troubleshooting, right? How do you baby step through when something you're trying to do isn't working, right? And of course, message boxes, but there's the list last lines and other things that you can look at that it's just good practice, right? Of understanding what's available out there, and I think it'd be a good forum for it.
Yeah, I got an interesting one where basically I have not figured it out yet. Basically, I built for my job, I built a password manager for logging into modems, and I signed it all 1 through 9 and F1 through F12, but always when I initially open the program and always capture the first password, the function, like the IE scrape function, will always grab the URL of the browser. And so anytime I capture the first password, I got to do it twice And then after that, all the rest of them work just fine. And I have no idea how to get around that one.
Yeah, that one is also quite hard, at least without seeing the code and stuff. Right. But yeah, how do you actually normally grab the password?
I hover the mouse over the password and hit like Control-1, and it's supposed to grab it. And then, but it always grabs the URL, so I do it again. But all the rest of them, Control-1, Control-2, Control-3, you know, they all grab the passwords just like they should. But yeah, I haven't been able to figure it out for a couple months. I just don't know why.
It's hard to say if it's actually on a Windows thing or whatever it might be. So, yeah.
Yeah, we can at some point, Josh. If you want, I'll take a look at it offline. But it's always the other. So one of the things, by the way, I love about troubleshooting. A tip I learned, there was a couple things. One was, you know, have a what do they call a bobblehead doll sitting in front of you, right? And when you're trying to figure out what's going on with your script, explain what is happening to the bobblehead, right? Because basically, when you're doing it yourself, it's like trying to proofread your own, you know, grammar. You don't actually say the words out. You keep what's in your brain, and it doesn't go through it. But when you're trying to explain what you're working on to somebody else, that thing it can just pop in your head of like, oh, you know, or you can explain it to someone. Let's say like I didn't know anything about AutoHotkey. Just explaining it to someone of what's going on, it might trigger the whole thing of like, of course, you know, right? It dawns on you what it is that you're doing.
I've used that method quite a few times of actually sitting there line upon line of code and not being able to actually figure out what it is, and then having a colleague which might not be as code savvy as myself and come over and say, and here it's doing this, and oh my god, I can't make it do whatever, and then explaining to them what each line is doing or whatever each function is doing. And more often than not, I'll hit that spot where, yeah, here it was, here the error was, and I didn't find it before actually explaining it to someone. So
yeah,
it's a good way of doing that also. Yeah. And I think it can work, as you said, with a bobblehead or a colleague or someone on a call or someone on screen share or whatever. I think it will work with whomever, as long as it's just not your own inner monologue. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So on your summary notes there, where groups together, similar like library, and then you say don't use this, don't instantiate. What do you mean by that?
Don't use .this, I should have said. I'm writing notes to myself. I'll, you know, explain it. But that was when you do this, you don't have to use the .this when you're calling the functions or the methods.
It's this
that
dot.
Doesn't make sense. Yeah.
What's that?
The dot is after this.
Here, yeah. Sorry. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Good.
This is a special term that refers to this instantiation.
Yeah, and if you were adding it, I guess because you didn't instantiate it, and who knows if I spelled that right,
there is no this.
Yeah, there is no this. And then like when one of you guys said that, I'm like, oh, I get that now, why you wouldn't use it, because you didn't instantiate it, and that's what this is. So you just call it directly. Yeah.
So in other words, like if you were to use this, you would only use it inside that class.
Correct.
All right. That makes sense.
and it would only be available if you had said new this whatever class. Yeah, okay. So it's actually referencing whatever instance of the class that's within whatever variable or however you stored that instance of the class. Yes, this. Mm-hmm.
Beautiful thing.
Yeah. Glue means super glue. It's just someone saying something in the chat. I'm just reading.
Did you say super glue?
Super class.
Oh,
I don't know.
superclass.
It wasn't supposed to be super class, but super global. And that's what classes are. Most of the time, it's just a super global object. But that's from something within the nature of how AutoHotkey is. What is it? It's a prototype. No, what? It's something I can't remember.
Yeah, what is? I remember seeing stuff with prototyping and stuff. What is that related to classes?
It's just, I can't remember where it's defined. It's just the definition of what AutoHotkey is. It's not per se an object-oriented thing. It's a prototyping something, or something like that. Can't remember the actual wording. Anybody else who can remember what they normally define AutoHotkey as being?
I think somewhere in the documentation, Lexicos, or maybe it was originally Chris, makes a statement about how C, you must prototype functions, whereas AutoHotkey doesn't enforce that, but some of using a class is prototyping like.
And what is a prototype?
It sort of sets out the in C. It sets out what each variable is going to be, what type it's going to be, what the return type is going to be. It basically sets up ahead of time what that function is allowed to accept and return.
Interesting. Thank you.
Where AutoHotkey doesn't have that kind of rigid structure.
Oh, thank God. Oh, was that out loud?
I think this one was a good one. I really do. And
Can for people who've programmed in other languages, is there anything that you want to mention that is besides what you just mentioned right there of that's different with AutoHotkey classes and AutoHotkey versus any other language? Things they like, don't like. Is there anything that comes?
Well, I like that I don't have to. I like that I don't have to compile it. Whenever I use the Microsoft tools, I spend more time trying to decode all their error messages. That I do more. I do more fooling around with it than getting anything done.
It's interesting you say that because I wrote, and of course, I don't think they'll be surprised. I had automated within LinkedIn writing messages to my first connections in LinkedIn saying, hey, here are these webinars, right? Hope to see you there and blah, blah, blah. But I asked people because I'm curious, right? It wasn't meant in any way to be spam. I was interested in what do they use AutoHotkey for and this and that. And I think one of the most common threads I heard, especially by people who are really programmers, so to speak, and not just people more like me who like to save time, I'm not a programmer, was they will use AutoHotkey to develop something very quickly and have it as something they can kind of proof of concept play with and create because it's so much faster and easier. And then after they get it kind of where, doing the things they want to do, then they take it into the other, what I definitely understood is the why, but they take it into other languages where it takes, I don't know if it's weeks or what, but to write it all out and define it. I got to guess one reason is, maybe it's two, security and speed would probably be better in other languages, but or of course, our company, several people were like, yeah, our company doesn't allow us to use open source software.
why not?
Because they're companies.
I know that in the case of my company, it's because we handle a lot of personal, private healthcare information.
Oh.
So they're paranoid about anything.
Yeah,
and
that's...
so they're afraid that the fact that it's open source will make it more vulnerable to external hackers.
Yeah.
Yeah, it might be.
Mostly rampant paranoia.
I'll tell that to my boss.
Yeah, but just because you're not paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get you.
That's also right.
one of my favorite books, Catch-22, when he's like, they're like, but why are you thinking people trying to kill you? They're shooting at me. Like, they're shooting everybody. That doesn't mean they're not trying to kill me, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, of course, that's one way to view it, and yeah, I'd say paranoia is an ugly thing, but yeah, it comes from somewhere. So of course, but yeah, I don't know. I've seen a few re-engineering attempts with different stuff, and yeah, closed source is absolutely a bitch when it comes to that. And of course, it can be done if the information is interesting enough. But more often than not, just having it available will, of course, ease the work needed to be done. That's one way to kind of make it harder. I see that. But it's interesting to see some of the companies that has been closed source for so long, like Microsoft, actually starting to open up to open source.
It's almost hard to believe. It's pretty amazing, really.
Yeah, I hope it's for the better. But still, it's weird. I don't know where to really put Microsoft when it all comes to this. I once had an idea that they were the largest, and they probably were at one point. But when you look at which companies makes the most money, Microsoft really isn't up there anymore. So I think they're just trying whatever they can to make sure they don't become irrelevant.
Obsolete, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're failing because, man, I'm on Windows 10 and I'm still getting BSODs. Give me a break. 20 years later?
Still, I haven't seen any on Windows 7. I'm still on 7, and I haven't seen any for ages now. So
yeah, maybe they fixed it in one of the updates, but yeah, it was some sound drive or something like that. BSOD, and I was just like, what? You gotta be kidding me. I figured they figured it out, yeah, after 20 years, but
yeah, or simply stop using that. Why present it for the user anyway? But yeah,
right. Yeah,
yeah. It must have been something they simply did not really control. But yeah, have you seen these computers built for Windows or whatever it is they call them? They use a special name where
the laptop / tablet ones.
Yeah, no, those are the Surface Pros, right?
Yeah, right.
But I've seen some in stores where it's Microsoft has been working together with the actual hardware company to make a computer where Windows runs more optimal or whatever it is.
I didn't talking about like IoT, like Windows IoT?
It might be. I'm not sure.
I know Windows put out the IoT version for like Pi and Internet of Things. It's like a real cut down Windows 10, but
no, that's not what I was pointing at. It's just something that I saw in the stores where it would be labeled with something, let's say like tested by Microsoft with Microsoft, whatever. But yeah, I can't remember what it was. Well, I didn't really buy into it. So
if the vendors creating the laptop or whatever device would just stop loading it with so much crap, right, it would probably be fine. That's why I still, no matter what, build my own systems, because they just load so much junk on there. It's ridiculous.
Back to the comment about open source, I think what scares a lot of folks is that one of the main advantages is that lots of people contribute. You can have hundreds, thousands of folks that make contributions to the code, and there's so many bad people out there. There can be someone putting in some bad code, and hopefully someone centrally located kind of looks at everything coming in to see if it's bad, but it's very easy to envision bad stuff getting through. And how do you have any confidence of what's in there when you look at an extremely large open source piece of software?
Yeah, of course, backdoors and other small glitches in there are, of course, harder to detect. And of course, if the people making the code are better than the people looking over the code, that's, of course, also an issue. And those people exist, that's for sure. Do we have any more on classes, Joe, or are we just simply chatting now?
We're just, as far as I know, if that was all I had.
Yeah, it was as well. It's the second hour, and people are allowed to ask whatever they have on
Nathan,
their
you were
mind.
done, right?
Well, yeah, I guess if it's wide open, there was a little bit in the chat about somebody had mentioned Iron AHK, and that had interested me a while ago because I'd written a very large program in AutoHotkey for someone, and initially during the early phases of the project, after writing thousands of lines of code, it turned out that most of the users would be on Macs. And so I had to go. And so I looked into things. Obviously, there's things like Boot Camp and Parallels and VMware Fusion and even some lighter things like Crossover and Wine and stuff. But all of it was a problem. So the question is, how would we go about getting something I'd already written in AutoHotkey to work on a Mac? And so there was that attempt, obviously, years ago. I think the last update when I looked on GitHub was 5 years ago, and I have no idea if it would work on a script written to take advantage of more modern features in AutoHotkey like arrays and objects, classes, and so on. So I don't know if anyone out there have any experience in using Iron AHK to run on other platforms, either Linux or Mac? No, guess not.
No, I've not really heard of anybody getting that to work for them.
Okay.
Yeah, I can't even remember what Iron HK was written in. Wasn't it written in C# or something?
It was written in C#, and
C#,
the whole idea behind writing it in C#, of course, is that it was. I mean, the basic idea is that it's .NET, so it can run on any platform that has .NET support, and arguably, I mean, it was a great idea on lots of counts. It had a real compiler, so it wasn't like our current so-called compiler that really just packages the runtime AutoHotkey with your source code. And it actually had a real compiler that created binary, and it was cross-platform. So certainly a good concept. But oh yeah, I see someone's got it on now. So if you if you go up a little bit, scroll up on that page, you'll see the clone or download. If you on the right side, the green button. If you click that, you can actually do the download the zip. We'll download a file called master, and it has everything in it. I mean, there's even a make bat file, and there's all sorts of examples in it. And I mean, on the surface, it looks as if it should work, but you can see the time frames on there. The most recent one is 5 years ago, and some of them are 6 and 7 years ago. So, and I understand. I don't know this fellow at all. This Polyathene. I guess he was all part of the big hullabaloo years ago, and
interesting wording.
Well, I guess that's a kind expression. But,
I actually don't know because I was exactly. I was there when it all went down, and there was a communication error, might be a kind way of putting it, where he was hoping to bring AutoHotkey in one direction, and others weren't having it, and that meant that, yeah, he kind of lost the respect of a lot of older community members. And I think that was maybe the biggest issue, because I actually think that he contributed quite a good amount of stuff. So, yeah.
Yes, again, as long as we're just chatting here, I wonder, anyone have any insight into why V2 hasn't been released? It's been around for years, and lots of people say they're using it now for all their stuff, but Lexicos keeps saying, well, don't really do anything with it because the syntax is not cast in concrete, and I could change it. And actually, there was a very recent thread that was interesting where somebody said, well, hey, this is really inhibiting folks from using it. If you keep taking the position that you could change the syntax, we can't go writing programs with thousands of lines of code in it, knowing that we might have to come back and change it all. So I'm wondering if anyone else has. Actually, we're talking about getting Lexicos into a thread where it's very targeted and really takes advantage of his expertise. I think a V2 webinar would be terrific with Lexicos driving it.
One of the things that I've kind of asked myself quite a lot of times with the V2 is what do I get as the end user? And of course there's been put a lot of stuff into V2 over time, but as I've seen it, most of it is beneficial to the actual developer, Lexicos, and I'm all for him having an easier time of extending AutoHotkey and stuff like that. But as the actual user of AutoHotkey, it's hard for me to just make the switch. As you said yourself, if he keeps changing the actual things that I'm used or learning to use, might be the way. So I need to relearn whatever methods I need to use to do stuff. So unless he at some point says, now my only focus, might be the right way of putting it, will be version 2, I don't ever think I will actually make the switch. And it needs to come from him, because he's our only, that is the right way of saying it, our sole developer, actually. I don't think we have anybody else really left, do we, that is helping him on the actual source of AutoHotkey.
That's a good question. I don't know. That'd be another reason to have him on. But I'm excited about V2 for no other reason than they get rid of that lousy equal sign as an assignment operator, which never should have been there in the first place, and causes some really insidious bugs in scripts. I mean, I can't tell you the number of times that somebody says, "Oops, I guess that equal should have been a colon equal." So, but and fortunately, he did remove it from V2, but.
No, I actually think that V2 came from that specific issue.
Yeah, it could be.
Yeah, I
think I can't tell you what I can't understand. I mean, it would be so trivial. I would be thrilled to just extend, say, the pound warn, and to have a warn on and to no equal. I mean, to flag it in an assignment statement. If I used equal in an assignment statement, just to have a flag for it I'd be happy with that. And I mean, I'd like to see an option that says don't allow it, but that would be one step further. And if you can't do that, at least warn me if the equal sign is used as an assignment operator. And I would think that would be pretty trivial to put that in V1. And but I've suggested it enough times that I'm stopping banging my head against the wall on it now.
I think, this reminds me also when, several years ago, I started learning Python and played with it enough. And at the time, it was on, what was I on, 2.6, I forget what. But then, 3 was also out. And there was this big split in the Python community of, people, they put so much functionality and kept backporting the stuff they put into 3 back into 2 that nobody was switching. Right, and it was really dividing the community. It reminds me of us when we were the vanilla AutoHotkey and then the AutoHotkey L, and thank God we finally made that switch. But it's one of those, I hear what you're saying, Joe, but at the same time, if you keep putting the stuff that you want back in the older version, I don't know if we'll ever move. And I'm not saying we should, right? It's just, I could understand that would be one of the hesitations of why to do that. Why not?
No, that's certainly a good point. Hey, got a question for us. Hopefully there are some developers out there that are actually writing software, and I'm curious, in recent years, I've gotten so taken with AutoHotkey, I really love it, that the bulk of the programs I've been writing, and I don't do anything with hotkeys, hot strings, keystroke. I mean, I view it as a programming language, and especially with the great, fantastic COM support and being able to call, run and run wait to call other command line stuff. It's really quite a nice development language. But I'm wondering if people on this call who are developing software and actually creating commercial software, either selling it or doing custom development for clients, do you feel as if an AutoHotkey developed program can be your final commercial released product, or do you just use it for prototyping and then do it in, shall we say, a real language like C++ or C# or even VB.NET, something like that? Anyone?
I don't see why AutoHotkey wouldn't work. I mean, because basically, like for what I do, I'm a remote service technician. Basically, we work from home over the internet, helping people with wireless internet troubles for an internet company. And with the way I was able to automate my desktop using AutoHotkey, and then further being able to compile it into an EXE, I'd imagine all my fellow RSTs would want the kind of desktop automation that I got, and I don't see why AutoHotkey EXE or AutoHotkey compiled wouldn't serve just fine as professional software. Because I've handed it out to a couple of people, and I tell you what, man, they love it. It's like, yeah, it's better than mouse clicking and keyboard and clacking your way through your 8-hour day.
I would say as well that some of the stuff that I've made, and one of the things in particular was used by 5,000 people on a daily basis, and it was made purely in AutoHotkey using COM and IE, and it worked flawlessly almost, I would say, and I don't see me using the needed amount of time on doing that in something else. And the company I made it for, they did not complain because I could make it so much quicker, and the offers they'd gotten in other languages was just outrageous compared to what I needed to actually make it. So
I think it gets back to what was it Christina mentioned? There's two things. One is the security, right, of people worrying that it's locked down. But the second one also is, can I secure it and stop people from being able to back into it and just steal the software that I write? Those are the two that, to me, that and I work in neither of those, and it matters, right? So I will.
That's been an issue for a long time. If you search the forum for the word we usually use with that is code obfuscation, and if you obfuscate your code, and the reason you need to do that is what I said earlier, is that basically a compiled EXE isn't really a compiler in the traditional sense. In fact, you notice the actual name of it is convert AHK to EXE, and all it does is package the actual AHK executable along with your source code. Now you can do things like mpress, and you can use mpress, which both compresses and encrypts, except that there are mpress out there, and anybody can go basically get your source code. And then I actually wrote my own obfuscator that takes every variable. It reads AHK source code and takes every variable and turns it into a string of capital letter O's and lowercase letter L. So it looks like a string of zeros and ones. And that's actually how I generate. I just use a binary to generate a unique 15-digit binary number and then convert them all to O's and L's and make that variable name. So it's still the source code, but if you try to read it and do anything with it, and especially with no comments, it's going to be pretty tough to steal. Of course, if your purpose in stealing it is just to have it and be able to have unlimited licenses for it and not pay for them, it's not going to stop that.
Right.
No, and that's also what I'm thinking, that unless what you are doing is the most genius thing ever, and not something that can be replicated without knowing exactly what is happening. Most of the time, whatever program you write or whatever functionality you make, someone else could, without actually copying your source code, could mimic the same functionality most likely. But most of the time, they just won't. So again, it's hard to say where the effort to kind of secure your code needs to end, because at some point it would be just as easy to just write it in whatever language they knew.
I'm curious as an informal poll here, because I see people chiming in the chat that they've sold stuff. How many people on the call here have sold one way or another, not getting paid as an employee, where I'm using it at work, but literally have sold and made money off of some AutoHotkey stuff? I have, right? I've been lucky enough to make some stuff that I made a fair amount of money, thousands of dollars, right? I was very happy.
I have also. But I guess in more recent years, I've been wondering if it's the right language to continue on, or if I should veer into VB or C# or even C++. But so far, I really haven't had complaints from customers when I've distributed the EXEs, and I actually use there's a pretty nice installer called Nullsoft. It's another freebie, and you can create an installer. So what I do is I compile with the AHK compiler, and then I can even code sign it, which is nice. I've got a code signing certificate, so it looks pretty professional. And I code sign the EXE that comes out of AutoHotkey, but then I use Nullsoft's installer to do proper things like give the UAC prompt, and it allows you to click on it to see the publisher certificate and all that good stuff. And then it does an actual real install, and it creates an uninstaller, so you have a proper way of uninstalling it by just going into control panel programs and features. So it's, I mean, it looks pretty professional, but I just have these lingering doubts about AutoHotkey being the right language to be creating commercial products in.
Well, and somebody mentioned earlier, I was going to bring it up, but they were talking about equivalents in other language, using it for like Linux and other things. And one of the things that, to me, about AutoHotkey that makes it such a great tool is how closely it hooks into things in Windows, right, that I can access and do stuff that I can't do with a lot of other programs. But that's also, the benefit, but it's also could be a curse, right, because now you're stuck on Windows computers.
Yeah. I've thought about some of this also, because, of course, the reason that AutoHotkey is so closely related to some of the stuff that you can do in Windows is because a developer has actually written what is needed in C++ to give you the easy access. So, of course, it could be made in other languages if they were willing to write the exact same type of functions and calls and stuff. And AutoHotkey has a lot of years of troubleshooting. I'll bet you that the different developers have actually tweaked these functions quite a lot of times. And I know I've seen a few where the WinActivate actually does quite a few attempts on the back end without actually telling you, just because that's how it actually gets the stuff done. So of course you could do it in other languages, but sometimes you just need to write either a lot more code or simply not have the same, what's the right word, the same amount of pre-experience put into whatever it is that you're trying to do. Did that make sense to what you asked?
I've felt that generally speaking, being tied to just the Windows market doesn't bother me. And as whatever it is worldwide, it's got, pick a number, 90% market share. I mean, you've got your Unix variants and you have the Mac, but I mean, if I could write a program that was successful in the Windows world and,
Sure.
You could sell a few million copies of it. So I just happened to get caught in this one situation where I developed for Windows, and lo and behold, after the entire program was developed, in the 11th hour, my client said to me, "Oh, guess what? The users are all on Macs," because I didn't know it. It was a school environment, and the Mac is big in academia. So that was unusual. I mean, other programs that I've developed I'm quite happy with the size of the Windows market.
Yeah, and I think if you also take into account the vast majority of programs we're going to write, people who are going to, let's rephrase that, people who are going to spend money on stuff, generally speaking, they're people who work at companies that are running Windows computers, right? They're not, I'm not writing stuff for IT people that are using Linux. I wish I could, but if I'm going to make some money off of stuff, it's going to be for people who are running Windows computers. I mean,
I had some, I can't remember, maybe a year or a couple of years ago, where I kept seeing the mobile market just extending exponentially, and more users. And here in Denmark, you wouldn't see anybody standing at a bus stop without having a smartphone in their hand, and that's just how that is. And it seems like more and more internet usage is being done on mobile devices.
Yeah.
But in the office, actually typing on your smart device, that's not really something that you see that often. You could, of course, connect a smart device to, let's say, a docking station, but you would still have a keyboard to actually do the typing. And then I had someone say to me the other day, "Hey, but you could just dictate to whatever device, but you actually speak quite a good amount slower than you can actually type. So that isn't really productive to speak to a device when you can actually type it much quicker than you speak." So I keep seeing that some kind of desktop device will keep existing for a good amount of years to come. So, and we also talked about that, Joe, at one point, is how long does the Windows platform actually live? But for the foreseeable future, I don't see a real alternative in the work environment to the Windows platform.
I know it's going to outlive me, so I'm okay with that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fair enough. Someone on the chat also mentioned that nowadays, most of the time, it's a good idea to sell things as a service online. Mm-hmm. But again, most of what I do with AutoHotkey is actually automating other people's online services.
Right.
Because for some reason, someone wants to do the stuff differently, or they want to scrape the stuff, or they want the stuff in another program. Yeah, whatever it might be. Yeah. So yeah, the service is absolutely, if you have something that you can offer up as a service, that is the easiest way to make money online, probably. But yeah, I still see the need for whatever it is that I do, at least.
Yeah, and the other thing, which that's Jackie and I, when we first started chatting, it was almost always exclusively web scraping type stuff. But the things that we haven't got into, just using web services, HTTP query requests for performing, connecting. I mean, that's the other great thing. Even though some things are going away, the web services out there is just exploding. So you can use AutoHotkey to connect to a ton of them and, do queries and extract data that you want straight away, right to it, without using a browser. And it's amazing. It's so awesome.
So, Joe, Jonathan just posted something, if he's still on the call, if maybe you could jump in, but he posted something in the chat that basically says nowadays it's better to make software as a service. So instead of making a client-side program, which is largely what I've been doing, he's saying, consider software as a service, a web app basically, and then customers presumably can use the program on any device that has a browser. So, hey, Jonathan, if you're on the phone, you want to jump in and tell us more about that, I'd like to hear it.
Yeah, hello.
Hi.
I've made a script of some sort that is hosted as a AHK web server. So you can connect to it from online, and you can get it to do stuff.
And
just
so,
a prototype for now, but I'm working on it.
And you are writing this strictly in AutoHotkey?
Yes.
Oh, that's great. Well, I'd love to see that. You willing to post some of it when you're done?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen at least one post, maybe two, talking about using AutoHotkey on a server.
I haven't seen that, Joe. If you could send out some links to that, I'd love to see it.
Yeah. It was for me, and I know Jackie said it too. I'll agree with his statement of like it opens up a lot of doors, right? It's amazing. For me, even though it does, because my background is in AutoHotkey, it would be easier for me to do it in AutoHotkey. But that would be one of those things. Like I don't know if AutoHotkey is the right instrument. To my understanding, but it's probably because I'm not a programmer, right? You're kind of getting AutoHotkey to do stuff that I think other languages might be better set up to do, but I don't know if someone who knows their stuff can tell me I'm full of it.
Well, I'll tell you, I've had great luck doing just about anything I want to do with AutoHotkey, but it's all been on the client side. So, and also there's a great command in AutoHotkey called URL download to file. So, and I've used that a lot to get stuff off the internet or the web. In fact, I use it actually as a software update mechanism. I hit the web and see if there's an updated version of the software, and then I can prompt the user on the client side to say there's an updated version. Do you want to update it? And it works very nicely. You can get like global configuration files and other stuff like that with this URL download to file. But I've never gone the other way. I've never figured out how to go from the client side up to the server.
That's been something I wanted to raise. You hit exactly on the issue that, like, I do exactly what you do. I use that URL download to file or to variable, and it works great. But I do that to sort of have my own licensing system for users to know that they're allowed to use my software, but also, like you said, to download updates. But I would like to get information on their usage and stuff, and the only way to do that is, like you said, to go the other way, but I have not been able to figure out a good way to do that.
We have done a few different stuff, you and me, Joe, I know, and you asked me as well as at one point, because we have these different websites, and you can easily in WordPress, as an example, use a Json API or whatever. And if you have any type of online presence, you can easily enough use the different COM methods of sending HTTP calls to a web service. So your program can easily enough inform you on whatever server you have with whatever information you actually wish to collect. So we can do it. The hard part, and the one that I think we talked about just before, is of actually making AutoHotkey being the controlling element on the server. Mm-hmm. So that an AHK script or server is actually what's handling the requests. AutoHotkey can easily enough talk to all of the other API interfaces that you would see online normally.
How does it do that, Jack? What calls are you making in your AHK code? You mentioned doing HTTP calls. What calls are they?
I can see that Joe is pulling some stuff up here, which is one of the functions that are there. But I would normally use the COM object. Let's say, it's getting late here. Request? Yeah, Exactly. HTTP request would be one of the sure ones I would use, and it simply depends on whatever API that you're using. And most of the time, you would see REST APIs online. That is simple URLs that you
endpoints.
Yeah, endpoints. Yeah, you have one on screen right now where you create the Win HTTP request 5.1, and with that you would use that object to open a tunnel or a connection to a web page or web server, and then you could send header requests, and you could get an entire website's content, or you could send an entire website's content back. It simply depends on the endpoints online. So you could build your own AutoHotkey browser if you wanted to.
So you have to know what kind of, like if you're working with a server, you have to understand how it's set up in order to be able to write to files on it.
Yeah, one thing that I've done a couple of times is, let's say you go to a website and you want to know how or what's happening when you click whatever you're clicking. You can most of the time in Chrome or in IE open the developer tool and see all of the HTTP calls that are going on behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And those can then be reinterpreted, or whatever you want to say, dissected into AutoHotkey usable stuff. So you can mimic whatever a web page is actually doing from AutoHotkey.
Yeah, but what if what you're doing isn't? I guess you're saying if you want to write to files, you have to sort of mimic a web page yourself. I mean, that's all I want to do is write to files. I don't want to be like a web page.
Yeah, but let's clarify with the because what Jackie's saying is absolutely spot on. But with web services, right, and API calls, you don't have to send the entire HTML page, right, and the request and return everything back, right? Web services allow you to say, hey, here's the destination, the endpoint URL, and I'm going to tell it I want this parameter and this parameter returned to me, and it returns just that. It doesn't wrap it in all the HTML and all the other crap and all the stuff, right? That's what's a little different than what Jackie, and he was still right. I'm not saying he's wrong. He was giving an example of when you're replicating web scraping more or less, right, without actually using your browser. But web services, you can build your specific query, which is still, of course, what a browser does, right? It goes to a page and it might pass parameters to the page that will tell the browser to display certain stuff differently, right? It's the same process. It's just that with web services, and I was trying to find, because Google documents a lot of their stuff of the endpoints, the different parameters you can pass to it, and basically the different types of requests that you can have it return back, and you isolate it. You don't return everything in the world, so the volume is much smaller. It's just amazing the doors that it opens with using API calls.
It is quite a big topic, that's for sure. And
yeah.
What I was getting at before was that I recently made quite a large program for someone where the web page looked like you were doing whatever, clicking around and stuff. But on the back end, it was actually using their own API, which they hadn't published to anyone. But when you looked at the actual HTTP requests that were going on behind the scenes, you could see on the URLs that it was sending the information to, that there was actually an API behind the scenes. Whereas when you send a request to this URL, you would get one thing returned, and then you would answer it with whatever it needed. And by doing it that way, you could easily enough upload whatever information to them without actually interacting with their page. Mm-hmm. And you could do the same with your own server. If you had a server with an API set up, you could easily enough.
I guess that's the question, is how do I set up, like I have a server that I can do things to, if I need to implement an API on it somehow so I can interact with it, I would do that, but I don't know how to go about doing that.
One simple thing I have used at times was, let's say, Dropbox, where you have all of the stuff built for you already, and having a file on Dropbox being updated with a value. That is fairly simple, but it isn't. It is using someone else's code, which is always a good idea, and you need to write less complicated stuff to do it. Do you have an example of that anywhere, Joe? I don't recall having something like that.
Not that I can easily share that it would be live with real stuff that.
Yeah, and that's my problem as well, because clients would actually own the code. But yeah,
I think this would be a great future topic. I would be really interested in it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
for another webinar.
Yeah, it is. It's as Jackie said. It's an amazing topic that it's just not ending, right? That the possibilities. However, the general concept. So here I'm showing the Google API Explorer. And here are some of the different services you can call just to this one endpoint, the calendar endpoint, right? And think of these, I think of these as like methods that I can query the my calendar and return different things. But it's a little different than what Jackie's talking about, but I was just taking a step back of talking about API services in general and what you can do with them. It's so awesome.
How would you call one of these that's on the screen right now from your AHK script?
Well, it's the same thing as what I showed earlier. Let me see if I can. Yeah, I can bring this over here, so it doesn't have my token stuff in here. This was an API call where I'm passing in the URL, my authentication token, the language I want it from, and then the actual text I want to translate. At work, I have a proxy, so I have to detect if that's there. Here's where I call I create the object, right? I store it here, and I say open. It's a get call instead of there's the put. And there's actually there's 4, right, Jackie?
Yeah.
But this is usually it's either get or put. And then I pass it the parameters. And then in this one I'm setting, so you can set different headers, and this is where, especially if the thing you're connecting to is expecting a web browser, that's where more often than not you want to set some sort of headers in there to tell it what it should be looking for. This is if I had Fiddler. It used to be great. I don't recommend it anymore because it basically got its wings clipped with how well it was at telling you what's going on, but it used to be awesome at helping you understand what's getting passed between servers and stuff. And then I send it, and then I basically am waiting for the response. For this line here is saying, when you get the response, I'm going to store it here. In this example, I also copied to the clipboard and display it. But that's basically the
exactly. The thing you have here, Joe, if you use that on a normal URL, one that let's say google.com, you would make the web request, the COM object there. You would use the open with the get method, and then you would pass google.com as the base URL. Then in the next one, you might set a header. You don't need it. Yep. But when you then send that information to Google, to that domain, what you would get returned would be the HTML of Google's search front page. Mm-hmm. So that would be the entire HTML that would be returned there.
Yeah.
That is if you just do it to a normal URL. But if you do it to, let's say, one of Google's endpoints for their calendar, the ones that you just showed that is still behind there.
Right.
If you look up the actual URLs of those methods that you have there, then, and that's where it becomes an extended topic because you need to know those, and you can probably find them somewhere, Joe.
Yeah.
But just looking at them now, you can see here the code starts. So you have some scope there, the file stream. So yeah, it already is becoming quite involved.
This is why I love AutoHotkey, right? Is you see this stuff and you're like, holy cow. But this, I can see right now, this request dot, this is where it starts looking kind of similar to to what's going
Yeah.
on.
But what I saw earlier already was that it seems to be a JSON API. You can see there in the file stream client secret JSON.
Mm-hmm.
So it is passing a JavaScript object to, yeah, exactly, to the server. And it is probably expecting text in that format. So whatever is in that object needs to be formatted in the way that the server expects it to be. And if it gets what it's looking for, it will return what you are asking for.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the sense of it. It is just like all of these web pages that you have online have classes on them, where you can simply call methods, getters, and setters, and so on.
Yep.
Yeah.
Like you said, it's a amazingly deep overall concept, and at the same time, each API. Now Google, that's why I have. If you look here in my, is it this one? I have under Google, right? I have a bunch of the different basically web services that they offer, at least some of them. Their overall, how you pass them, you get one token value, and how you pass it and return stuff. It's very similar. It's awesome, but notice all these other, these other ones. There's Dun & Bradstreet and Clearbit and Amazon, and all these other ones that have different ways and different structure and how you need to pass things, which is why it's a tough concept to explain overall, because each time you use it, it's a little bit different depending on the endpoint you're connecting to.
But
I don't know.
I was just going to ask, are any of those examples two-way? Like you're not just pulling info from, but you're
Oh,
like,
sure. I don't know if these are, but they definitely exist. Yes, like the
So if you have the API shortener,
yeah,
I'm not sure if that's a URL shortener, but I'm guessing that it is, unless your token and stuff is there.
yeah. Here's a
Here
post.
you can see it is fairly simple what is actually sent and what is returned, because he's sending the long URL there, and what he's getting returned is URL's shortened version of it. So he's sending Google information and they're returning something else. So that's
I'd like to see something where we're actually writing to, like we're adding to a file or changing the contents of a database of a file of our own or something like that.
Sure. I don't have one I can do live right now, but I've written some that allow me to interact with my WordPress blog. Right, I can write articles. I can update dates on times when they were posted. I can change the header. I can do whatever, and I think that's a good example.
That would be awesome.
Yeah.
So is that in this code here? The status is kind of like error level coming back.
I didn't listen. Sorry.
I was just curious if if that status coming back was essentially a return code.
No, that is the HTTP protocol. Like, was it a 400? Was it a 200? Right?
Yeah, that is something that the request object is actually handling that. So when you send the request, the object is, of course, getting a lot of information returned. And some of that is then put into variables like status. So if the web server is returning 404, the result object or the web request object would then know that status of the page.
Yeah, and it's isolated instead of, like Jackie said, there's a lot. I'm trying to pull up I wrote one, a file that I can pop open here in a second, which has all the headers and stuff, just to give you an idea of some of the things that you can both set and return, get received back from it. But you can see this is my folder just on WinHTTP requests. I'm trying to see where I said, because somewhere in here I have one with the headers. I don't think it's this one, though. No, that's not it.
I'm just looking for something as well, but I'm not finding something.
Headers. There we go.
You found something. Good.
Yeah. So this, of course, this is not necessarily a functional script, but it gives you an idea of the set headers. So notice here, these are all set headers. You can set where it's coming from, the user agent, the language, different ways to do that. If it's encoded, different. If you want it to be a keep alive versus I forget if that it'll drop right after the cookies, right? So which is awesome because if sometimes you need to have a cookie passed to it, the referring URL, and then somewhere down here, there's some other crap of when things expire and whatnot. Somewhere down in here, I documented some of the returning things, but maybe I didn't. Maybe that is just in my this is headers. But anyway, you get the idea. There's a lot, right? And I built this just because it was a lot of different things that you can take into account and do and customize and tweak. And that's where Jackie mentioned earlier, especially when you're dealing with stuff with web scraping. So there's two things I would say is one, if you're web scraping and you want to automate that and not kick up a browser, which is nice because this is really light compared to opening an IE object. It can be really fast, but you can use the developer's tools, right, to look at your network traffic, which is how you can start figuring out should you set certain types of headers, right, and when you pass to it, which is really helpful. And I had a second thing I was going to add, and now I lost my train of thought. Sorry.
Yeah, that is sad. But yeah, I think I'm beginning to lose some of my own. I was looking for something that would give exactly what was asked for, something that would change an actual file on our server or updated database or whatever. And I was looking into some Trumpia stuff here. But again, the problem is that I'm writing it for a client and I've actually...
Right.
It's confidential. So I'm trying to find something else. But this is an RSS reader? No. Dropbox? No. Yeah. How about this? Yeah, I can't find anything right now that I can easily share. But we can easily do another one, Joe, on this topic.
Yeah. I just remembered one, Jackie. I forget why we were talking about it, but it had to do with I was trying to drive people to my website, and then I was saying, oh, you know what? I can give them a link and pass parameters to it, and then I could use this to go read and check my server logs basically and see if that had been, hit recently. And that was one where I had managed to do that. I can figure out where that. I don't remember what we were working on though. I don't know why I did that.
No, I think you're just testing it because you might want to use it from your emails, I think.
Yeah. So, and Mailgun is another great one that I can't really share the stuff because I have my things right in there with the token values. I don't really feel like going to change them. But you can automate sending out emails and dynamically writing emails and have all the tracking and everything. It's pretty awesome. Anyway, I think I'm kind of done.
Yeah, I'm actually also... It's not because I don't want to answer it, but we need to have a script to actually go over to kind of make sense of it myself.
But the topic is so big, it deserves...
I wasn't looking for answers today. I was just saying how interesting that would be for either a future webinar or a tutorial on the website, on the forum.
Fair enough.
I guess one other suggestion, Joe, for topics is because AutoHotkey isn't all that popular as a development language, I've seen a lot of sites. I had one client who wanted me to write something, and my first thought is always AutoHotkey, and I went to, it was actually an IBM site where they had published their APIs, and they had all these different language SDKs up there, including C#, C, C++, Java, JavaScript, Perl, PHP, Python, Ruby. I mean, everything, but no AutoHotkey.
Like this. Yeah.
So,
exactly.
yeah, there you go. So I think it would be interesting to help us, for those of us interested in writing AutoHotkey, to say, okay, if you run into one of those things you're showing on the left there, a SDK like that, how would we interpret and figure out from that and translate it into coding in AutoHotkey? I think that'd make a really interesting webinar.
Right. Agreed.
You heard all of that, right, Joe?
Yep. No, I agree. I mean, Jackie, we've talked to that of often. Like the great thing about like using Excel is you can do that Visual Basic recording macro, and it's so close to AutoHotkey syntax that it's really easy to figure out and adapt usually. I agree. Some of these I get here and I'm like, oh God, I say a little prayer and I look around and I start guessing, and then I'll search Stack Overflow and a couple other places for something a little closer. But yeah, I think it's a good.
One of the things when just the stuff that you have right there on screen is that by not making your own classes for, let's say, automating IE, you get used to seeing stuff like get element by ID or create text node or append child, because they are inherent methods of the DOM. So you at one point you get used to seeing these methods because they are actually built in to the HTTP kind of languages, or the entire way that the internet is kind of set up, I would say. Because if you look at Java script, you would see these methods as well, because it's not something that's specific to a JavaScript. It's not something that's specific to AutoHotkey. It's something that's specific to the internet. So by kind of remembering that, it's always a good idea not to put any more roadblocks ahead of yourself just to kind of ease your own work. Because if you're used to using the methods that are already out there, you'll have a much easier time of interpreting stuff like this in other languages, because they will be using the same methods and the same calls and the same setters and all of that. So that's at least what I've gotten out of it.
Hey, Joe and Jackie, or anyone wants to jump in. One last question from me is that I wanted to write some scripts for a backup utility that I use, and the doc for the backup utility says that you can use scripts written in any scripting language that is supported by the Windows scripting host, and that is installed on a computer. And now it says typically they're written in VB script. And I actually posted a question on the AutoHotkey forum saying, hey, does AutoHotkey, is it supported by this? So I never even heard of it, the Windows scripting host. And people kept on, I couldn't get my message across, and I eventually gave up after a half a dozen or so responses. People kept on thinking I wanted to write from AutoHotkey, I wanted to write VB or VB script, and that isn't what I want to do. I want to write straight 100% AutoHotkey, but want to know that if I submit it to this other program that is looking for something that is supported by the Windows scripting host, is AutoHotkey supported by that? Will AutoHotkey scripts work as, in that case, as a VB script would?
Windows scripting host is a standard Windows library. So what I'm guessing here is that just like you would call, let's say, a del, if you made a del call for a specific Windows function within some other program or other system file, that's probably something like that you would probably need to do with the Windows scripting host. It's probably a service or some other thing like that that is already running that you need to connect to be able to do what you are asking. But I don't know. I don't know for sure.
Okay. I think there's actually a COM object call to it. I think you can do COM object something like wscript.createObject AutoHotkey.script. But I don't know exactly what it does. So, but okay, just curious.
Yeah, fair enough. I can't say for sure what it is. I haven't used it.
And I'll go with what he said.
Yeah, that's fair enough, Joe.
I was listening, but my eyes were floating, and I just had to take a break.
Well,
awesome.
It could be time to call this one then, huh?
Yeah.
Let's do that.
Hey guys, thanks for everything. Really enjoyed it as always.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Have a good day.